So I saw this picture by the artist Randy Green, and I just thought I've got to have a go at drawing that blue cool superhero hair. So here goes. So I drew it out and then I inked it using waterproof fine liners, and then I started to colour it in, and the first colour that I used was Cool Aqua, and I just used this as my lightest base kind of colour, and I decided that I was going to do all of the hair with this. So any highlights that had to be done on the hair I was going to use a white gel pen for later, but the first thing that I did was just cover the whole of the hair with Cool Aqua, just a nice base even coat of that colour over the entire hair. I was trying to stay quite faithful to the image that I was drawing from the reference picture by Randy Green, and the shades of blue are kind of warm shades of blue, so I decided that's what I was going to use as well. I chose cyan next as my darkest blue marker, and that was going to be as dark as I would get. So I'd already laid on Cool Aqua, I'd put on some shadows with cyan, and then the colour in between, my mid blue if you will, was Arctic blue. So my approach here was slightly different than usual. Usually I'll layer up the markers going lightest, medium and then dark, but I chose to try putting on my darkest shadow first, so using the cyan first and then popping in with Arctic blue to sort of blend that cyan in so it wasn't such a sort of stark shadow, a blended shadow of the two. So one of the earliest things that I've done to simplify the colouring and make it a bit easier for me is to limit my palette, so I know I'm only using 3 shades of blue: the cyan, the Arctic blue and the Cool Aqua. That's all I'm using, so I don't have to have about 10 markers on the table. I've just got those 3, and I know I can just rely on using those 3 for the entirety of the picture. One of the things that I noticed looking at the reference image was that whenever there was a highlight, a light area on the hair, what the artist would do is make the colours either side of that highlight really quite dark, so there was a really strong contrast between where the hair colour suddenly changed to have a nice shiny highlight. And you can see just with the bit that I'm doing now, I've done the edge of where the highlight begins in cyan, and I'm now blending it in with the Arctic blue. It's a technique that I've seen quite a few other comic book artists use, to darken the edges of a highlight, and it's got a really good effect. It's very contrasty, strong effect, and it really makes the highlights when they're finished absolutely pop off the page and look really, really sharp and strong. So I'm still just using the 2 markers here, my mid-tone and my dark tone. I'm putting on the cyan, and every time I put on a bit of cyan, I'm then going in with Arctic blue, my mid-blue, and I'm using that to blend the cyan in, go along the edge of the cyan and try and blend it in. Notice I just left a very small sliver of that spike of hair as the Cool Aqua, completely untouched by Arctic blue, so that's a sort of natural kind of highlight I've just left on the edge of that spiky bit of hair. As I add just a bit of depth to that big strand of hair that you can see me drawing there, one of the things that attracted me to wanting to have a go at this and draw this was the technique of not drawing individual strands of hair and drawing hair as though it's a big spiky clump. I'm guessing it's got its kind of historic roots there in manga illustration where the hair is very, very spiky and it's all sort of clumped into these massive big chunky spikes. Possibly makes it easier to draw, I certainly thought so. But it's a really cool technique, and it actually works really well when you're trying to then colour it and give it depth using the markers that you're using. I'm now doing the opposite side of the highlight, so you can see I've left this kind of large sort of smooth undulating area in the middle of her hair there. That's going to be the main highlight where the light is striking. So I did one side in cyan and Arctic blue, and I've now gone over to the other side and I've done the very edge of it in cyan, my darkest marker, and now I'm doing fill-ins with the Arctic blue. That big streak going up the sort of center middle of Cool Aqua that I've left sort of untouched at the moment, that is the main big sort of solid highlight on the hair, shiny highlight on the hair, and that's going to be the one that's going to try and give the hair this kind of sense of 3D. But the artist's been very clever anyway, because what they've done with the hair is they've drawn the bit I'm just doing right now with the cyan marker in front of the section behind. So you've got this kind of like the wispy sway of the hair, but you've clearly got depth already before he even starts to colour it, because you've got this bit in the background and then these bits in the foreground in front of it. As I start to colour these sections in the background as well, these are obviously in a lot more shadow, and the head is actually casting shadow on this part of the hair. So I know I'm going to hardly leave any Cool Aqua showing here at all. It's going to be mostly cyan with then some Arctic blue just to blend that cyan in a little bit. I'm working wet into wet with these markers, meaning that as I'm putting the cyan on, I'm going straight in with the Arctic blue, trying to sort of blend the edge of the cyan and Arctic blue together. And in this particular section, you can see me doing here as I finish off with the cyan and I start to flick those strokes upwards in the same direction that the hair appears to be flicking. I go straight in with the Arctic blue afterwards, and I'm using the Arctic blue to blend along the edge of where cyan and Arctic blue meet, and I do that a lot to make sure that there's not going to be a sudden change between cyan and Arctic blue. I really try and blend those together well. It's not an exact science, and what you can see, I look at it once it's dried, that left hand side that I'm pointing at now, it's not blended very well at all. You can see the cyan change to being Arctic blue really quite strongly. So I decide what I'm going to do is go over that section and blend them a heck of a lot more than I did the first time. I'm sure that I can use the same two colours that I used before, so cyan and Arctic blue, and I can put them on pretty much the same as I did before, but what I need to do this time is make sure when I'm putting on the Arctic blue, I go over the transition, the bit where the cyan meets the Arctic blue, and I sort of blend that in more than I did the first time. Really go over that sort of part where the two colours meet with my Arctic blue, in the hope that then these alcohol markers, sort of being both wet on the page together, will blend together far more successfully than they did at first. The drawback to what I'm doing now is, of course, the left hand side of the hair is going to have an extra coat of colour on it that the right hand side doesn't have, so in effect it's going to end up being a bit darker, but I'm hoping that even if it does that, using the white gel pen later on to balance out those shadows and cut through some of those shadows might just save me. So you can see me working those edges much more with the Arctic blue this time around to really get a nice soft smooth blend and a soft smooth change between the two. Then I go back in using the cyan marker, and what I'm doing here is I'm just using this to edge the highlight, like I talked about earlier, making the edge of that highlight much stronger, much more contrasty, so that the highlight really pops off the page a lot more, but also using the blue to go along the edge of some of the fine liner lines that I put in earlier to make that sort of big strand of hair look as though it's slightly above the one below it by just adding that little bit of blue cyan shadow. And I also use the cyan marker to just go back in to the side of the hair that I said was in a lot more shadow because of the head casting shadow on that hair. So I sort of double up there as well and do a lot more cyan and a lot more Arctic blue in order to make it look more dark and shadowy and in the background. As I'm just finishing up the blue and just putting in some little last touches of the blue cyan marker, I'm looking forward to using the white gel pen because I know that this is going to give me some really nice sharp white highlights in the hair where I need them, and also provide a bit more contrast and a bit more pop to really make the image sort of jump off the page. I'm just using a pretty cheap white Pentel Uniball white gel pen. I mean, there's a ton of different ones you can get on the market, but this is just a basic kind of standard one. It's had a bit of use though, so I'm finding that when I'm trying to do some quick flicked marks with it, it's not responding as well as I'd like, so I have to kind of slow down a little bit with it in order to get a nice even line of white out of it, and also in some cases go over my white lines a little bit to make sure that they're a nice solid white. I'm going straight off the reference image with this one as well, so I'm using the same kind of white lines in the same spaces and places that I've seen the artist Randy Green use them on his picture. So along the edges of the hair, obviously right next to some of those black outlines, provides a really nice strong contrast and gives you a really nice good strong highlight. I like using a white gel pen when I'm doing markers because it means you don't have to leave really bright white highlights as you go along. You can put them in afterwards, so you don't have to worry about it. You can just put color on. You can put solid color on, like I put cool aqua on to begin with because I knew I'd be using a white gel pen later, and you can just put it straight on top of those colors, and it's so much more easy than trying to leave white highlights on things as you go. I mean, for instance, look at the hair. These really thin little white highlights that I'm putting on with the pen, how difficult would they be to leave using markers, especially markers that are gonna bleed a little bit. Even on a bleed proof paper, even on the best kind of paper, you always get a little bit of bleed with the markers. So trying to leave a sort of really delicate white line like I'm putting in with the white gel pen now, trying to leave those with the markers, it would be absolutely solid to do. Another thing that I noticed about what the artist had done using the whites is he'd used a variety of marks. He hadn't just used straight lines. He'd used little dots, like you can see me starting some of these white lines with over on the left-hand side of the page. And it gives you just a little bit of extra variety in your work, and in particular the lines. And here you can see me adding white in the center of the cool aqua highlights. And again, that gives you just that extra bit of white there, that white highlight in the middle of that color, making it look even brighter, even lighter, and giving the hair this kind of almost silvery, foily kind of shine to it. I can already see that using the white pen and putting in these little dots and these little lines, it's sort of enriched the look of the hair. The hair looked okay before with just the colors and the black, but these bright whites and these highlights that I'm now able to add, it adds an extra sort of level of detail to the hair, extra level of complexity. It just makes it look a lot more polished and a lot more finished as a result. And it's trying out techniques like this and learning how to use these to your advantage, which is why I wanted to draw this picture and do a tutorial over how I drew it in the first place, in the hope that I would sort of absorb some of these little these kind of hints and tips and techniques that you see the artist using that really can improve your picture, not just for an outline but for an actual white highlight within the color on a piece of work. Well, it's pretty much almost finished, so I just hope that you've gotten somewhere from this. I hope that you feel that I've done the great Randy Green's picture justice, my attempt of doing a tutorial of his style. And then there you go, there's a sort of still image showing a bit more of a close-up of what I've managed to do with it. And if you haven't watched my previous video yet, check it out please. It's a sketch of Bilbo Baggins done in speed drawing, entire thing from drawing to marker finish.